In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this fine art edit in Lightroom and Photoshop. So this is a picture I took last year in Kenya, and it's just a simple portrait of a lioness, and I wanted to create something a little bit different. Now I'm going to try as close as possible to recreate this. I was kind of in free flow and just doing my own thing, so I'll try and get as close as I can to it anyway. Let's walk back to the beginning then, and the first thing I want to do is address the background. If you look, I did actually darken the background a little bit on there. And the issue that I had was that the lioness is almost identical to the surroundings with regards to color. So I want to address that here. It just makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to select the background and I'm going to just pull the saturation down a little bit. And also I'm going to just bring the exposure down as much as I can around there, bring some of these shadows down and say okay to that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit and add in a vignette within Lightroom. So I'm going to bring that in, and this just helps having to dodge and burn so much. So let's just push the feather up a little bit. In fact, I'm going to push the feather up just so we can get this roundness. You can kind of get an idea of where it is then. So I think somewhere about there will do. And then let's just feather that off. There we go. So that's now ready to go into Photoshop, but I'm going to come back and actually just darken that a little bit more to about there. There we go. Now that's ready to come in. So it's just a quick way of not having to do as much dodging and burning. So I'm going to right click, edit in Photoshop. Okay, so we've got our layers open. First thing I'm going to do is create a new layer, and I'm going to address this area here, around here. There's only a little bit left to do. So I'm going to go to edit, fill, and then we want to select 50% gray. Okay. And then we want to change the blend mode to overlay. Now I'm going to come over to the burn and dodge tool. So I'm going to select the burn tool, and I'm going to start with the highlights, and I'm going to bring the exposure down to 50%, and I'm just going to start blending some of that in. So you can see where Lightroom's adjusted, and now I'm just trying to finesse this in Photoshop. It doesn't need a lot, and also we are going to be adding color back into this in a little while anyway, so I'm not too worried about this being jet black because it's not something I want to do. I don't want to just completely black out the background, but I'm practically halfway there. So I'm just trying to get rid of some of the highlighted areas that you can see around here. Okay, that will do. That's a good starting point. So that's given us something good to work from. Next up then, what I want to do is some dodging and burning, and I want to do that on her mane. I want to really just take control of this a little bit and make it pop. Now before I do that, I'm going to come up to levels, and I'm just going to darken this down a little bit just so it's a little bit more moody. So I think somewhere like there is good. And then I'm going to come up and I'm going to add a curves adjustment, and I'm going to push that up to about there, and then I'm going to add another curves adjustment, and I'm going to pull this down. So I'm now going to invert these. So Control Command I, and that will just invert everything for us. And then I'm going to come over to the brush tool and make sure the foreground set to white. I'm also going to work at 0% on the soft round brush. Now you can use the brackets keys to control the size of the brush, which is really, really important. Now I'm going to start brushing in, and this is just the areas that are already highlighted on the picture. So I'm going to go back a step because I don't want to be working at 100%. So I'm going to pull that down and I'm just going to test it to see what it does, and I think that's okay. So all I'm looking for is the natural highlights that are on her, and trying not to overdo it too much. And I'm also going to make sure that I'm changing my brush size just to accommodate the smaller areas, and around here as well. That's it. Around there. Her chin there, you can see there's bits and bobs there. Okay, so I'm now going to jump over to the other adjustment, which is going to darken everything for us. So again, what I'm looking for is natural areas that are dark, and this will just help us get more contrast within our picture. So I've talked about this quite a lot, and it's quite important for you to know as a photographer that depth is actually perceived with tones, not color. So it's quite important that we do this dodging and burning just to add more depth to our pictures. So you can take your time with it and really make sure that you get everything perfect, exactly how you want it. But it is literally paint by numbers. And what I'm also doing is I'm just taking advantage of the fact that we've done this, and I'm just darkening the areas that I missed earlier through the other dodging and burning. So we can certainly do that here and blend it a little bit. So that's given us some nice dodging and burning, and you can see what that's done there. Now what I want to do is I want to add another curves adjustment, and I'm going to come to the top here, and I'm going to bring this black side down there and close that down. Now what I'm going to do is just reveal everything. So I'm going to reveal the areas that we dodged and burned in the first place within the picture. So I'm going to change the color back to black, and you can see what that's going to do. Yeah. So the idea now is that we just pick out these specific areas. So I'm going to drop the opacity and the flow down, but don't worry too much because I can come back and change that anyway. But what this is going to do is just make the image pop a little bit more, and it's going to really help us bring out detail. And again, I want to keep changing this flow, keep changing the opacity just so it doesn't become too flat, and make sure that we're following the contours of where this light is actually hitting. So I'm going to pull the eyes out. I'll probably pull more of the eyes out later on anyway. That's it. Same here. There we go. So now we've done that, what we want to do is start adding some color into this and just make it pop a little bit more. So I'm going to add curves adjustment, make 3 points, and I'm going to pull the darks down, and I'm going to push the highlights up, and then look at these midtones and just push them across, and you can see that's just going to make everything pop a little bit, and that's going to bring out all of our dodging and burning. And again, we can bring that opacity back down if we want to, so it doesn't have to be as severe. I reckon about 80% looks pretty good. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to add a color balance, and this is literally, I'm going to go through from shadows to midtones and highlights, and this here is just for you to play and see what you want to do with your image, what colors are kind of asking to be added. And it's just a case of selecting and moving these sliders. There's no right or wrong way, it's whatever you want the image to look like. So I think I pretty much just done what I'm doing here. So just played around, and we're going to add more color back into this later anyway in Lightroom, so I'm not too worried at the moment. I think somewhere around there looks pretty good. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Right, let's come back to the brush, and I'm going to push the opacity and flow up on these areas here, so the foreground color to white, and I'm going to come back onto the actual highlights there. And now what I'm doing is I'm just going over them areas again, because now we've toned everything down, we've brought some more contrast back in. I can now go over that layer again. I'm going to brush it a little bit bigger and just make these pop a little bit more. Okay, there we go. And let's do the same with the blacks. Just going over them again, just to make them a little bit darker. That's it. Let's add a blank layer, and then with the brush tool, I'm going to come over the colors here, and I'm going to add a bit of a warm orange, I think. So let's bring this down to about there. Let's make the brush bigger. So I want this to be a light source coming in. So I think somewhere in there. So I'm just going to click once, press Control Command T. It's going to zoom out. We can move this around then. So I'm going to put this light source sort of up here, but I'm going to right click and select Skew. And then that's going to give me the option to kind of really pull this out and position it. And I want the light source to be over this side. That's it. So I think somewhere around there is what I've done. And then I think what I did do as well is duplicate that, Control or Command J, and then Control Command T, and that gives us the transform then. So then let's take the opacity on this and just see what works best. So I'm going to zoom back in. So I've just dropped that to around 60%. That looks good. I'm going to select both of them. I'm going to just group them together. So Control Command G, just to group them into a folder. And then I'm going to right click and put Convert to Smart Object. I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to select Gaussian Blur. And you can see that I've pushed this all the way up to 1000 pixels just to give it a little bit of a glow rather than a spot. And then what I did do is I brought this back at this stage back into Lightroom now. So I'm going to File and then Save and bring this back into Lightroom. There we go. So now we can start making a little bit more adjustments with this and just finesse it a little bit. That's all we need to do now. Let's have a look at the highlights. I want to bring the highlights up a little bit, and these shadows, I'm going to bring these shadows down a little bit. I'm going to look at the white balance as well. So I'm just going to push it up just a couple of stops, and then the whites, again, I'm just doing this by eye. I'm just pulling and pushing and just seeing what works. I want to add some texture and some clarity to it just to make it pop a little bit. And also I'm going to push the saturation and vibrance up a little bit. Come back into the tone curve and just play around with that until I'm happy. And all I'm doing is just looking for contrast, as much contrast as I can get away with without blowing out highlights. We can pull in some of the refined saturation here just because when we're doing this on the tone curve, it can push the saturation up a little bit, but we can then just pull this back a little bit if we need to. So let's have a look at the colors. So we've got, I think it is the oranges and yellows. So we can, again, play around with these until we're happy. Same with the saturation, we can push and pull. There we go, and the brightness as well of all of that, so we can just play around with it. Now what I did do was add another radial up here. In fact, I think I did a couple of radials up here. There we go, and just pull the exposure up a little bit up into this section here. Pull this down, so we're just kind of mimicking a little bit of that radial that we've done in Photoshop. Let's just push this color temperature up a little bit, and then right click, duplicate. Let's just pull this down here, and this just adds a little bit of light back into them areas there. And again, it's just artistic licenses. You can do whatever you want, really. There's no rules to this, but what this is going to do is just add a little bit of contrast down here, and up here. I'm going to pull this up a little bit. It's about there. That's good. And then just come back to these highlights. Just pull them down a little bit there. So I'm going to come down and add a vignette back in. Somewhere around there. And then I'm also going to come up, just sharpen this a little bit. I'm going to keep the detail at 50. Hold the Alt or Option key down and just push that up so it's just the lion's face. Here we go. And let's come and address these eyes. So I'm going to select the brush tool, show the overlay, and I'm just going to select the iris there. And on this side as well. In an ideal world, you want to do these separate, just because one's darker than the other, but I'm just going to do it quickly. And here, so let's just pull that exposure up and boost the saturation up. And also, let's just add some texture and clarity. There we go. So that's looking pretty good. Now we could, if we wanted to, now come in and add some colors if we wanted to, so we can come and select these kind of oranges and yellows that we had within Photoshop. We can just dictate how much of that we want in. So something like that looks good. And then midtones, again, this is where you can play around with color. And again, this is going off completely different to what I'd done in the original. I'm trying to get it as close as possible. So if you hold the Option key down when you're doing this, you can actually just refine this adjustment a little bit more. And if you hold the Command key down on a Mac, it just gives you a selection within that saturation. So that can help sometimes. And the Shift key can just keep your selection of your hue bang on, which can help as well. We can just play with these now. Same with the blend in and the balance. Just see what the color's doing. I think somewhere around there. Yeah, that looks good to me. And then let's come up, add some contrast, and then fine tuning these highlights. So I'm just pressing the Option key down so I'm not overexposing anywhere. I just want to bring them highlights down a little bit. It just seems a little bit overexposed, so somewhere around there. And I think the saturation come down about there. And then I think the yellow could potentially, or the orange could potentially, yeah, be warmed up a little bit. So we've got a little bit more of an orange look to the line. So I'm just playing with these colors because there isn't actually a huge amount of color in this. You'll see that as I strip away, it's literally, there you go, it's just orange, a little bit yellow. So it's just balancing this out a little bit. That's it. The other thing that we can do as well is we could, if we wanted to, we could matte off the blacks. So we could pull the bottom up. That can help sometimes as well. It just takes off the kind of polished look. And you can also do the same with the whites as well. So it just mattes everything down, and you'll see what I mean on there, before and after. So if we look at the before and after with regards to this is what it was when it come from Photoshop to now, I think we're practically there. I would probably add another radial up here and just emphasize that light a little bit more. I think probably there, yeah, and add some warmer light in, just so it's a little bit softer. And I think that will, yeah, that will really help. Just bring the sharpness down a little bit, just so it's softer light. That can sometimes just help as well. There we go. And I think that is pretty much done. So that's what I would do. I'd probably bring these eyes up a little bit and just play around with that. There we go. So if we look at that, you can see that that's the finished article. It's nearly there. So like I said earlier, when I was doing the original edit, I was in free flow. So I test things, I do things, I move things, I blur things, and I really just take my time with it and spend a long time doing stuff and then undoing it. The other thing that I think I've done as well was with this radial here. If I put the overlay on, you'll see what I do. I just softened everything. So if I just invert that, there we go. So around there, take the overlay away. I just pulled some of that sharpness down as well. So just pulled that down just to make it a little bit softer around the edges there, and that helps just with everything, bring the eye into the picture a little bit more. There we go. So yeah, that's how I've done it. So if you look at this image here, and then if you look at the original, that's how I've done it. So I hope that's helped. I hope you've enjoyed that, and yeah, you've got something from it. But that's all I've done, and it is just a case of doing step by step, messing around and seeing what you get. But it's quite a simple portrait. It's nothing too over the top. Yeah, I hope that helps, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.